Good morning, church. Good morning. I am intern Anna. I am so excited to be here. I first just want to thank Pastor Phil just for giving me the opportunity to speak in front of all of you, and also just the rest of the staff just for a really amazing internship this summer. So I am working with the student ministries, so grades 7 through 12. Yeah, okay, awesome. One of my favorite parts of this internship has actually been the students, though. They're really awesome, and it's been really cool just to talk to a lot of them and get to know some of them better. I do want to be really candid with you, though. My first week here, I was not as excited to be here as I am right now. For a couple reasons. First of all, I don't like change. So Port Huron is about 4 hours away from my home. I go to college 30 minutes away from my home, and I go home every weekend. So I'm not used to being away from home for longer than like a few days. Number two, I don't like big groups of people. So, not you guys. This is fine, right? Like, it's when I have to like go into the group and then like mingle. It's not as good, okay. Number three, I kind of overthink like everything all the time. So it was, my first week here was a midweek 1, so it's grades 5 through 12 all in one room. So that week it was like 120-ish students. And I wasn't speaking or anything, like I was just going into the room to mingle and meet people, but that was a lot for me. So I did it though, I went and talked to people and it was fine, but I started freaking out. Because I started thinking, well, if I can't even talk to people, like maybe I shouldn't be at this internship, maybe I shouldn't be in youth ministry, maybe I should just drop out of college, I don't even know. So I made it through the night though, and normally when I get into these tizzies of overthinking, if you will, I go and I call my stepmom because she is just a good person to vent to, right? Because venting is really nice, right? It's a good release of emotion. We get to get everything out. So I vented to her and I told her everything, and I was like, I shouldn't even be here. Like I'm not in the right spot. And then she said, Anna, you've only been there a week. Yeah, so. Hindsight is 2020. She was right. Okay, like it's fine. I woke up the next morning. I was like, I'm ready to go to work. I feel so good about everything. So in that case, I just needed sleep. But the reason that I'm telling you this is because I started to think of the idea of venting and what good it can actually do. Because while she could be there to encourage me and to support me, she really couldn't actually do anything about it. So today we're going to read Psalm 6 because this psalm is kind of like David venting, except for they call it lamenting. But I want to take you through my train of thought, how I got there, and before I do, I also just want to let you all know, I do know I talk fast, okay? I am aware of it, just so we all know. I do plan on slowing down. Okay, good. So I started thinking of this idea of an actual like air vent when I started thinking of venting, right? And I was like, well, what are the similarities? Like, why do they even call it that? I thought of two things. Number one, air vents are loud, right? I am loud when I vent. Two, air vents kind of just blow a lot of air into a big space, but like you really don't feel anything unless you're right in front of the vent. I also blow a lot of air into a big space, and unless you're right in front of me, you don't feel whatever I'm saying, which they usually just think I'm mad at them because I get really like aggressive. So I'm gonna read wrong. Okay, so I was thinking of the Psalms then, right? Because venting is just this big release of emotion. Yes. So I was thinking the Psalms are known for David's emotion. So I literally started at Psalm 1 and I just started flipping through until I found one that looked kind of like a vent. Psalm 6 was that psalm. So I'm going to read it to you, and then I want to show you a couple differences that I noticed between my venting and David's lamenting. So in Psalm 6, David writes, Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger or discipline me in your wrath. Have mercy on me, Lord, for I am faint. Heal me, Lord, for my bones are in agony. My soul is in deep anguish. How long, Lord, how long? Turn, Lord, and deliver me. Save me because of your unfailing love. Among the dead, no one proclaims your name. Who praises you from the grave? I am worn out from my groaning. All night long I fled my bed with weeping and drenched my couch with tears. My eyes grow weak with sorrow. They fail because of all my foes. Away from me, all you who do evil, for the Lord has heard my weeping. The Lord has heard my cry for mercy. The Lord accepts my prayer. All my enemies will be overwhelmed with shame and anguish. They will turn back and suddenly be put to shame. Yeah, I do not sound like that when I vent for a couple reasons. So if we talk about venting versus lamenting, the first thing that I noticed is that venting is trusting in a person versus trusting in God. So when I vent to a person, I am telling them, hey, I trust you to listen to me and to be there for me and to support me. Maybe you can't do anything about it, but I know that you're still there for me. When David laments, he's talking to God, and he's saying, God, I trust you that you hear me, you accept my prayer, but more than that you're gonna do something about it. Because he trusts God to do that. Number 2, there's this idea of anger versus release. So when I vent, I do it because I'm either mad or I'm frustrated or I'm confused, any slightly gross emotion, basically. But the thing about venting is that it feels like a release of emotion at the time, but really when I vent, I just want somebody to validate how I'm feeling, right? So like if I'm mad and I'm like, oh, I'm so mad, then I want them to be like, yeah, you should be mad. Yes, you be mad. And then I go, yeah, I am mad, thank you. And then I keep being mad. But when David is lamenting, not saying God doesn't validate our emotions, right? But it's not like David's gonna say, oh, I'm in so much anguish, and God is like, yeah, that makes sense. You should be in anguish. You should be in anguish. No, David gets that release from telling God because God is saying, yes, you do feel that way, but now it's mine. Number 3, there is this idea of stuck versus progress. So when I vent, I do it because I'm stuck. I don't have anywhere else to go, right? I've exhausted all of my options. I can't do anything about my own situation, and neither can the person, but at least it's going somewhere. But when David laments, he's making progress, right? Because again, it's not just going to a person, it's not just a revolving door of emotion, it's God's now, and God's gonna actually do something with it. So today, I wanna walk us through a little bit of how to lament. Now, I'm not gonna give you like a word-by-word thing or anything, but most laments have 4 parts to them. And I wanna go through those in Psalm 6. So for Psalm 6, verses 1 through 3, there's an address to God. In verses 4 through 5, there's a request of help. In verses 6 through 7, there's a description of the complaint. And in verses 8 through 10, there's an expression of trust. So I want to go through each of these, and hopefully we can see how to lament and how it can help us. So in verses 1 through 3, we'll start in verse 1, David says, Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger or discipline me in your wrath. Now, when I think of this, have you ever had to tell your parent something that you did wrong, or maybe you feel bad, and you're like, Dad, please don't be mad at me, but, and then you go into it. It's kind of like that, right? Because God can be scary sometimes, right? We see all these stories about how he's wrathful and vengeful, but we also see that he's just. And so when we address God, it's really just being able to be honest with God, right? It's being able to say, God, this is how I feel, and I need you. If we look in Exodus 33, verses 12 through 13, Moses says to the Lord, you've been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me, teach me your ways so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people. There's no mask on Moses. Moses is being very upfront and honest with God. Or if we look back at Psalm 6 and verse 3, David says, my soul is in deep anguish. How long, Lord, how long? When I first read that, I was kind of like, oh, David's questioning God, like that's not good. He's not. Or no, he is, but he's not questioning God's power, right? He's not questioning that God is sovereign or anything like that. He's simply saying, God, I know you're sovereign, so when are you gonna do something? Because I know you can. Which brings me to point number 2, because after we get honest with God, then we can ask for his help. Because we can't expect God to help us if we're not even willing to be honest with him. So when we ask for God's help, when we request help, like David does in verse 4, he says, turn, Lord, and deliver me, save me because of your unfailing love. Here we're addressing that God is sovereign, right? But I want to unpack sovereignty because I think it's this big word that's kind of thrown around and it doesn't really get much explanation to it. So the basic definition of sovereignty is just having supreme or ultimate power. So God has supreme and ultimate power. When I think of that, I think of God as like this puppet master and he's controlling our every move. So like if I step over here, oh, God did that. However, if that's the case, we don't really have free will. So instead, I want to suggest to you that rather than God being completely in control of every single movement that we do, rather that God has supreme and ultimate power so he can choose whether or not he wants to exercise that control. So if you've ever seen or had I don't know, but babies are completely dependent on their parents, right? Can't do anything without their parents. So if a baby wants to be fed, it cries because it wants food, and the parent in their parental sovereignty gives the baby food, also because it's crying and we don't want the baby to cry. But it gives it food. And after the baby eats, it's awesome, it's great, it goes to sleep, and then 3 seconds later it wakes up because it's hungry again. But in the parental sovereignty, they know, like, I don't want to give the baby more food because that's going to be really bad for both of us later on when it's too full. So the parent doesn't mean they don't love the baby, right? They still want to comfort it. They still want it to stop crying, but they're not going to give it what it's asking for because that's not what it needs. Another example, because I don't have kids, but I used to work with kids. So I used to work at a daycare with 9-year-olds, and my favorite thing about 9-year-olds is that, like, they convince themselves or somebody convinced them that Band-Aids are life's solution to their problems.
Still are.
Yes. So I would have kids who would bang their knee on like a table or something, and they'd always come up, Miss Anna, I need a Band-Aid. So in my sovereignty over them at the time, right, because I'm in control of whether or not they get a Band-Aid, because we put them up high so they can't reach. But in my sovereignty over the Band-Aid, I'm going to say no, because I know that's not what they need at the time. I will, however, give them an ice pack. But the fact that they trusted me enough to come and ask me, that's the most important part, because I'm not going to know that they need help if they don't come ask me. And the same can be said with God. However, I think there are things that we don't see how God can help, right? Because there are things that a Band-Aid can't fix. There are things like grief and shame and guilt and loneliness. Things that don't have a quick fix. Things that we don't even know what to ask for when they come. So we don't see how asking God for help could do anything, so we don't see how, like, what can, like, So I don't know if any of you like puzzles in here. I don't. Let me explain. So I'm kind of a control freak, so I don't like that I can't see where all of the pieces go. So I wait until the puzzle is 98% done, and then I help finish it. Yes. But if we think of life as a puzzle, we get it one piece at a time, and God has the box. So in order for us to get through the puzzle, in order for us to do the puzzle, we have to be able to ask God what the next piece is. And sometimes he won't give us the next piece for a little bit, because it's not time for us to have that piece. Or sometimes it's one of those weird looking pieces that you're kind of like, what were the cutters doing? Like, why did they do that? But God knows, so we have to be able to ask him. Next is describing our complaint. And this is like the main piece of venting, right? This is the part that we can say how we're feeling when we really get those emotions out. So in verse 6 of Psalm 6, David says, I'm worn out from my groaning. All night long I fled my bed with weeping and drenched my couch with tears. Now, sometimes there can be an issue to venting to people because they can't always fully understand what we're going through. Even if we try to tell them everything that we're feeling, even if we cry and weep, they really can't always understand how we're feeling. In Romans 8:26, Paul writes that, pause. I found it, okay. Sorry. All right. In Romans 8:26, though, Paul writes that in the same way the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless grunts. So we talk about how sometimes it's really hard to talk to people. Sometimes we don't know what to say. Well, with God, we don't have to know what to say because the Spirit's going to intercede through us through wordless groans. So if all we can do is groan or weep or cry, God knows. Another way of saying this, Timothy Keller wrote that Christ literally walked in our shoes and entered into our affliction. Christ literally walked in our shoes and entered into our affliction. Now, I know some pretty empathetic people, but I don't know anybody who can walk in my shoes and enter my affliction. So even when we don't have the right words, even when we can't fully describe our complaint, or even when we can, God is there with us, fully in our affliction with us. Which brings us to number 4, expressing trust in God. This is the characterization of every lament, not a vent, because an expression of trust in God is also just this aspect of hope, right? That God hears me, God accepts my prayer, right? In verse 9, David says, the Lord has heard my cry for mercy, the Lord accepts my prayer. That is hopeful, because that means something's gonna be done about it. When I vent, there is no ending of hope. There is an ending of frustration or anger, sometimes crying, but usually frustration or anger. But there's no frustration or anger in David's tone because the Lord accepts his cry for mercy. But we have to have an action step because all of lament is expressing our trust in God, being able to take off our mask, being able to admit that we need help, being able to describe the complaint and expressing the trust. But ultimately, we have to entrust that which we're expressing. Basic definition of entrust is just to assign the responsibility for doing something to someone. So when we entrust something to God, we're basically saying, take it. I'm not worried about it anymore. So then entrusting is releasing. Now, the best analogy I could think of was regarding fishing. So if you are a fisher and I say something wrong, I apologize. I do not fish. Only because I'm really I move around a lot, okay? I'm really fidgety, and also I talk a lot, so I scare the fish away. But intern Jacob is really nice and lets me sit by him when he fishes. So there have been literally 2 times, but a couple times where Jacob will cast his reel thing out, and I don't know what it's called, but then he'll have to leave to go do something. So he'll be like, oh, Anna, will you hold my reel? And of course, as soon as I touch it, a fish bites the hook. So then I reel it in, because it's basically my fish. Right? Yeah. So then I get my picture with the fish, and Jacob comes back and he's like, Anna, great job, now you have to put it back. And I go, huh? That's my fish, why would I put it back? And he goes, well, it's not your leg, you have to put the fish back. Okay, loose analogy, but I think we do that with things, right? We have those things in life that we don't want to let go of. That is our fish. Now, the various reasons we don't want to let go of them could be that it's God's fault, why would I give it to him? Or if I hold on to it, it'll just go away. Or any number of things. But we have to be able to let it go. We have to be able to entrust and lament to God. For example, that's me, but my mom. That's my mom. She'll be there. That's my mom. Okay. Here you go. So that's my mom. My mom is one of my favorite people, my best friend. So I would go to my mom for everything. If I ever needed a vent, she was my person. Very non-judgmental, very kind, very caring. She would never make me feel bad about anything. Now, she would make fun of me sometimes, but never make me feel bad. And then my parents were divorced, so I would spend half of my time with my mom. So it was just her and I for a long time. And if you need to know what she's like, this is it. Very carbon copy of my mother, so we're very similar. But the thing about my mom is because she was my person, she was my only person. She was the only person I went to for anything that I needed ever. Now, when I was 9, my mom had cancer, and by the time I was 16, she lost her battle with it, and she died. And I could tell you about the grief that I felt, and I could tell you how lonely I felt. But the ironic part was that the person that I would talk to about all of that, she was the one that was gone. So suddenly I'm left without a comfort person. I'm left without someone to tell things to. And I blamed God for a long time, because I didn't know him. I didn't know that he was loving or merciful or just. I just knew that he was in control, and it must have been his fault. And I remember I was talking to my stepmom, and I was telling her that it was his fault. And I still haven't forgotten what she said to me, which is a big deal, because I have the memory of a goldfish, so this is a big deal. But she said that God doesn't make bad things happen to us. Bad things happen because we live in a broken world. But God will sometimes allow things to happen. And when he does that, he always has something better planned. So I don't want you to walk away from this and be like, oh, well, Anna said I can't go to people if I need comfort. I'm not saying that. I just told you at the beginning that I vent to my stepmom all the time. But what I am saying is that people or things cannot be our primary source of comfort, because eventually they will fade away, but God is eternal. So one of the ways that I deal, because I had that worst case scenario, right? I had the worst thing happen for me. But being here and being able to say, even if someone else dies, or even if I'm depressed, even if I'm lonely, even if I'm broken, God is still good. And I can still lament to God in my sorrow, in my grief, in my anguish, because he's good. So this morning, I pray that you turn to God and find your comfort in him, because he's eternal and he loves you. Can I pray for us? God, you are so good. You are our eternal source of comfort. We can address you, we can request your help, we can describe our complaint, and we can trust you completely and fully because you are good. Thank you for being our comfort. In your name I pray, amen.